Chapter 1. Fasting and You. Fasting is much more than simply not eating. It is both science and an art. It has meaning in terms of overall well-being and affects the psychological and emotional aspects of our lives. Fasting, as we use the term here, means total abstinence from all food for a definite period of time. The word comes from the Old English word fastin, which means firm or fixed. In other words, the fast is something we hold to on a firm basis under controlled and fixed conditions. In religious terms, it may mean abstinence from certain food on certain holy days. But this is partial abstinence rather than total abstinence. I know persons who have, quote, fasted, unquote, during Lent and actually gained weight rather than lost because they substituted for the dishes they gave up foods which put on even more pounds. Those who think that fasting is equivalent to starvation are entirely wrong. There are basically two periods in the process of abstaining from food that should concern us here: the fasting period proper and the period of starvation. As we study the phenomena of abstinence in greater detail, the distinction between these two phases will become clear. From the outset, however, it is essential to understand that the fasting stage continues so long as the body supports itself on the stored reserves within its tissues. Starvation begins when abstinence is carried beyond the time when these stored reserves are used up or have dropped to a dangerously low level. We must understand also that there is much loose terminology that adds to confusion on the subject of fasting. For example, we hear people speak of going on a, quote, water fast, unquote, which technically would imply that they are giving up drinking water. What they mean actually is that they are going on a fast in which they give up everything but water. The same illogicality exists in the expression, quote, going on a fruit juice fast, or, quote, vegetable juice fast, unquote. Again, what is meant is that they're giving everything except fruit or vegetable juice. The term, quote, partial fast, unquote, is used for any form of fasting where individuals put extremely limiting conditions on what they eat. The misuse of the word, quote, starving, unquote, not only in the vernacular, but even in some specific papers, has done vast harm. The word is derived from the Anglo-Saxon starvation, which means to die, not only from lack of food, but also from overall exposure to cold. This is how the phrase starving cold developed. Starvation is a process of dying, in effect. You cannot starve yourself into good health. You can fast for proper and reasonable periods and thereby improve your physical condition and often restore yourself to good health. It is possible to abstain from food for long periods of time with beneficial effects. At the point where the experienced advisor who conducts the fast realizes that the second phase of abstention from food is imminent, the fast is broken. I have said the fast is part of a new way of life which I outline in this book. Thus, it is not used only to lose weight. It can be, and certainly is, equally important as a part of the function of maintaining or even restoring good health. The sick or wounded animal finds a secluded spot where he can keep warm, where he's protected from the weather, where he can have peace and quiet and be undisturbed. There he rests and fasts. He may, for example, have a lost limb, but he lies there in his privacy and generally recovers without drugs, without bandages or surgery. In the animal world, fasting is a tremendously important factor of existence. Animals fast not only when sick or wounded, but also during hibernation or estivation, sleeping through the summer in tropical climates. Some animals fast during the mating season, and in many cases during the nursing period. Some birds fast while their eggs are being hatched. Some animals fast immediately after birth. There are forms of spiders who do not eat for 6 months after they are born. Some wild creatures fast when taken into captivity, and a domestic pet, a dog or a cat, may not eat for several days when it comes into a new environment. Animals also survive forced fasts during periods of drought, snow, cold, and live for long periods when no food is available. In mankind, fasting has been practiced in various parts of the world over centuries for religious reasons, for self-discipline, for political purposes, and as a means of restoring health. Only in recent centuries has the concept that we must eat to keep our strength become a deeply entrenched idea. Dr. Felix Oswald, a Dutch physician who came to America before the turn of the century, declares, quote, "The fast cure method is not limited to our dumb fellow creatures. It is a common experience that pain, fever, gastric congestion, and even mental afflictions take away the appetite, and only unwise nurses will try to thwart the purposes of nature in this respect," unquote. Fasting is centuries old. We read of it in the Bible and in Homer. It was employed in the care of the sick in ancient temples in Egypt, Greece, throughout the Mediterranean world. The use of the fast in acute disease dates back to remote times. It was prescribed by Arabian physicians during the long dark night of Europe's medieval age. In Italy, Neapolitan physicians as long ago as 150 years employed fasts that sometimes lasted for 40 days in the case of fever patients. The writer has been engaged in conducting fasts since the summer of 1920. In this period of approximately 45 years, I have conducted thousands of fasts ranging from a few days' duration to 90 days, both for weight reduction and in connection with helping the body recover from physical impairment. One particular case of an elderly man is of special interest because the results were so successful. Mr. A.B. was 70 years of age and had been sick a large part of those years. For 13 years, he had suffered with bronchial asthma, and during this time, he had been hospitalized 5 times. For an even longer time, he had suffered with sinus trouble. For 6 years, he had been completely deaf in his left ear, while he had suffered with an enlarged prostate gland for more than 6 years and had been impotent for a few years. He wore glasses, was bald-headed, and had the usual, quote, minor symptoms, unquote, that indicate the condition of his organism was not good, although it is common to ignore these evidences of incipient disease. Although he has been treated by the usual methods over the years, he had realized no genuine benefits from this care. Like others who suffer as he did, he grew from bad to worse. It is generally known that the regular care of asthmatics is purely palliative, and the patient commonly grows progressively worse with the passage of time. It is equally well known that the regular modes of care fail to do more than provide doubtful temporary relief for the sufferer with sinus disease. It seems hardly necessary to add that nothing of real value is done for deafness and for enlargement of the prostate gland. All these conditions are commonly understood to be incurable. Leaving his hospital bed in Chicago, the 5th time he was hospitalized for asthma, Mr. A.B. went directly to the airport and boarded a plane going south and went to a place that was reputed to be very successful in its care of asthma sufferers. Still wheezing, he was uncertain he could make the trip, but had determined to try. His own statement was that he had suffered enough and that he was convinced that the regular methods of care offered him no real promise of health. Like many thousands of other asthmatics, he had given the regular plans of care every opportunity to free him effectively of his suffering, and they had failed him. Arriving at the institution in the Southwest, he was admitted and told that he would have to discontinue at once and thereafter all drugs that he had been using for relief. But, he asked, what shall I do if I have an attack of asthma? You will grit your teeth and clench your fists and suffer through it, was the reply. You cannot get well if you continue to use drugs. He was sent to bed and instructed to remain there and take nothing into his mouth but water until he was told that he could resume eating. The treatment is going to be worse than the disease, he thought. Could he go without food? He was weak from years of suffering and from a lengthy period during which he was unable to secure enough oxygen. He was assured that he would be carefully watched, that no harm would befall him. With a certain amount of trepidation, he entered upon what was to be a new and surprisingly pleasant experience. Fasting is not always a pleasant experience, but it can be a very interesting and even highly pleasurable experience. The freedom and ease that one experiences during a period of abstinence from food often enables one to discover new and previously undreamed of depths of meaning of life. About 4 o'clock in the morning of his first night of fasting, Mr. A.B. developed a severe paroxysm of asthma. He was unable to breathe while lying in bed, so he sat up on the side of the bed and rang for assistance. The doctor came and, after observing and examining him, said, "You'll be all right in a brief time. It will take about 24 hours for you to become free of asthmatic symptoms, and then you'll be comfortable." When the doctor left, Mr. A.B. was struggling for air. "What kind of place have I come to?" Mr. A.B. asked the man in the next bed. They won't even do anything to relieve me of an attack." He continued to struggle for air for a few more minutes, and then relief came and he fell asleep. When the doctor saw him again in the morning, Mr. A.B. was feeling so well that he was ready to forgive the seeming neglect of the latter part of the night. He was more than overjoyed when he went on day after day, breathing as easily as when he was a small boy. With not the slightest sign of asthma, he had not another single paroxysm of asthma so long as he remained at the institution. His sinuses still draining, and the fast was continued. After about 6 days without food, he was able to void urine as freely as a boy. His prostate gland had shrunken to nearly normal size. He continued to fast and watched a day-by-day disappearance of symptoms until his sinuses cleared up. His breathing was a pleasure, and his chest was the source of real joy. On the 25th day of the fast, he asked the doctor if he could not break the fast. He was informed that this would be premature, and he was not fully recovered, and it would be wise to continue. "You are not in jail," said the doctor. "You cannot be made to fast against your will, but if you want my best advice, you will continue for a while." He took the doctor's advice and went ahead with the fast. What will always seem to him as a miracle was the fact that on the 36th day of the fast, he regained his hearing in his deaf ear. His hearing was so good that he could easily hear the low ticking of a small watch when held at arm's length from his ear. Equally important is the fact that the recovery of hearing was permanent. The fast was continued through the 42nd day, and then feeding was resumed. But he had another surprise in store for him. He discovered upon his return home, a few weeks after the fast was broken, that he was no longer impotent. As restoration, potency in men, and overcoming of frigidity in women are not uncommon results of the fast, this was no surprise to the head of the institution. This is no fanciful case, but an actual account of the recovery of a man who had suffered as I have described, and who underwent the fast as I have here portrayed it, and who made the recovery that has been pictured. It was not an unusual case, except in the variety of conditions that he suffered with, unless we say that the recovery of hearing is not a rule when the deaf undergo a fast. It is only an occasional result of fasting. This is so because deafness, like the loss of vision, may be due to a variety of abnormal conditions of the ear, and not all of them are remediable. Blindness is only occasionally recoverable by fasting for the same reason, although restoration of good vision and errors of refraction is not at all uncommon. The dramatic recoveries that occur during a fast of proper length and taken under the most favorable conditions can be believed only by those who have had the opportunity to observe them. The general tendency of both the layman and the physician, when hearing the stories of such recoveries, is to dismiss them as too fantastic for consideration. Yet there is nothing miraculous about the effect of the fast. If we think on the matter a little, we cannot escape the conclusion that fasting is the most natural and the most sensible means of care of the sick body of which we have any knowledge. For over 140 years, natural hygienists have employed the fast as a means of promoting health and enabling the body to recover speedily from illness. They have amassed extraordinary clinical experience in this area. These experiences turn into the deeply rooted conviction that the fast is a constructive force which must be utilized and developed as part of the regular practices of modern life. There are, of course, critics of fasting. Most of them know very little about fasting or its techniques. A. Brabbagliati, AMMD FRCS of England, so well puts it, quote, "The most popular criticisms of fasting are written by people who have never missed a meal in their lives," unquote. Whether it is to maintain or to restore good health, to gain weight or to lose weight, the role of fasting is a vital factor that can no longer be overlooked by any who are concerned with personal health and well-being, mentally and physically.